Hi, everybody that's here in the Global Forum. We are about to get started with our interactive workshop, Verifiable LERs, Finding the Language to Empower Your Community. I'll turn it over to Carrie and Gillian.
All right. Hi, everybody. I was telling people that this is the first in-person presentation and workshop I've done since February 2020. I mean, I've been doing it on Zoom this whole time, so it's nice to see all of you. I'm not accustomed to talking into a mic, so this might happen. Bear with me. All right. Actually, why don't I just tell you real quickly that my name is Dr. Carrie Lemoy. I'm the Director of Technology for the Digital Credential Consortium at MIT. This is my colleague, Gillian Walsh, and she is going to tell you a little bit more about the DCC before we get started.
Thank you, Carrie. Hi, I'm Gillian. I'm the Program Coordinator for the Digital Credentials Consortium. I want to start out by saying that I myself am kind of newer to this space, and so the topic that Carrie and I are going to discuss, I think, I'm a good experimental version of it, and that I've, over the past few years, just been learning how to explain what digital credentials are, what LERs are, to people that have no idea what they are. And so very excited to hear takeaways from this community that has such a broad range of expertise. Anyways, real quick about the DCC, we're a group of higher education institutions across North America and Europe, working currently on building out that membership to expand into other regions. We have been pushing towards developing infrastructure for digital academic credentials through different technology deployments, all in using open standards, open source software. And then we also engage in different research and advocacy projects that build community, just like the lovely community we have here.
Thank you. This is what we hope to do in this workshop today. Sort of like I said earlier, we want to sort of help have this like a conversational understanding of what verifiable LERs are. And we also, so we're going to do that first, right? We're going to talk about what those are. I'm going to try to explain it in a way that is just conversational in the way that I would explain it in maybe in my living room at home so that you could do the same. Then we're going to break into groups so you can sort of discover what your language is, right? Talk together, see if you understand it, right? Like work together in that way, answer some questions together. Then I'm hoping you'll take this language and it will empower you to feel comfortable talking about it in your communities, right? It's easy to talk about standards and competencies and things, but a lot harder to talk about this technology. And the technology actually is enabling quite a bit of this work, so it is good to have a pretty good understanding of it, at least at this level that we're going to talk about today. And then lastly, to equip you with maybe some resources and things, we will give you the slides and access to all of that. We have a demo that I created that's running off of a laptop that Julie is running over there, so that you can actually try this out yourself today. I think this is mostly, well, this is how we're going to do it. So for the first 20 minutes or so, I'm going to describe how verifiable LERs work. And there's going to be no question answering at that time, by the way. So hold on to your questions until you get into your groups. And then we'll be walking around to help you answer any sort of questions at all. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. And we'll have about half an hour for number 2 and number 3. So it should give us some time to do this together as a group. All right, are we ready to get started? All right. I had to put this in there. Also, how awesome. This is my dog. This is Ziggy. He makes faces like this all the time. There was another one before where he looks so skeptical. And I was like, he looks too skeptical. Let's not do that one. Let's do the one where he just looks confused. What the heck are verifiable LERs? That's where we're going to start. So verifiable credentials, verifiable LERs, right? The LER stands for Learning and Employment Records, if you're wondering what that acronym is. If you want to have fun, you can call them LERs. I think it's hilarious. I don't know why, but I do. So verifiable LERs. They are structured data that are aligned to vocabularies and contain in structure for verification. And the vocabularies that are inside of the structured data actually provide information for the data that's inside of the credential. This makes them immensely flexible for any kind of record, right? This makes them also human and machine readable. And also, they could represent single and multiple achievements. Sometimes there's confusion about that because we use the term LERs, right? They're always plural when we talk about them. But think about that and how we incorrectly use data. Right? When we say data, we really mean single or multiple pieces of data when we talk about it in that way. And so they can represent any of these and others types of achievements. And there are credential standards that are out there already. So you probably may have heard of Open Badges 3.0. And that is one of them that is particularly aligned to be verifiable in this way. And there's also the Comprehensive Learner Record, which is kind of like alongside Open Badges 3.0, which is more for like multiple linked achievements. But there's also the Credential Engine Transparency Language. That's a way to add data to these credentials, more descriptions. And then there's, like a slew of others. And at the bottom of the slides, I have a link to this Ed Matrix slide that has a ton of information about like what all of the other credentials are. Many of you are probably already even participating in some of those standards groups now. Okay, so what makes them verifiable? This is kind of the crux of it. You don't have to have blockchain. So anybody who thinks like we need to have blockchain for this, you don't. You could use blockchain as part of this, as part of the identifiers maybe, but really these can be contained data that can be digitally signed. So this is an example of a very basic digital signature, right, where, so Alice is sending a message to Bob. She's signing with her private key. This encrypts it. It says issuers down there, I'll explain. Then Bob, when he gets this, can prove that it came from Alice because it comes with the public key. Let me move on to the next one to sort of give the real example here. So an LER would be signed by the issuer using a private key or their decentralized identifier associated with their private key. And then when the verifier gets this later from the learner, they're able to prove that that issuer signed it and also that it hasn't been tampered with. So the whole concept of cryptography is that there's these two keys, this public and this private key, right? And you have a private key. Your private key protects your credentials. You'd never give it to anyone. It sits somewhere very, carefully away on a computer where it's backed up. And then you have a public key that you give out to everyone, kind of like a key to your house, right? You don't really want to give out a key to your house, but you might give them your address. And so by holding onto your key, you can prove control over your credentials. By the way, all of this description, it's kind of hard to do, so it'll be interesting to hear all of you are trying to do it too. This is probably the hardest thing to describe, but it really is the crux of all of it. So we can talk more about this later if you have any questions about it. So what do they look like? These are just some examples of some front-facing things. So the front-facing part of an LER, or a verifiable LER, can look any way you want. We have the Learn Card wallet over here. We have an example from TLN over here, and one from the Digital Credential Consortium's wallet. So the front-facing is really depending on whatever application decides. So there's a lot of power there in how you decide what the user experience is of presenting these credentials. Underneath, they look like this. It looks kind of scary for those of you who haven't really looked at this before, but it's really not. And let me show you why. Okay. I talked about the vocabularies at the top. We call them contexts. All of these vocabularies up here have like definitions for the other terms that are highlighted here. So as software consumes this data, they know to go look at these contexts to understand what is inside of these. So this is immensely useful in our space. Sometimes technically challenging, but immensely useful in this space because there are a lot of those. right? We have the open badges one, the comprehensive learning record. In Europe, we have the European learner model. We have the transparency description language. Any of these that are producing vocabularies, if they're inserted in there, then that means there's some kind of understanding here. Oftentimes we talk about envelope and then the letter, but really they're connected more than that. Okay? Time, Gillian. Gillian's keeping me on track here. Okay, this middle part here, the credential subject, this is the claim, right? Sometimes you hear it referred to as the claim or the payload. This is where, this by the way, is a very condensed and sort of not totally proper version, so I can get it on the slide. But in the credential subject is where you have the name of the criteria, the description of the criteria, the description of what this is. Is it a badge? Is it a degree? Does it have alignment to standards? All of this information is part of the claim. And the ID at the top of that, that's the identifier for the person that the claim is about. And the proof. So this is what makes it verifiable. This is where the cryptography comes in. So all of this, when it's issued, is digitally signed by the issuer. And you see the issuer ID is up there. So that issuer ID, which right there is a URL, but it could be a DID, just like the learners did, is used to digitally sign all of this. And this proof is used to communicate to the verifier how it can be verified, and then also the value that they can use to make sure that it has been signed properly by the right issuer, and also that this data has not been changed since they received it, since it's been sent to them. All of this is the critical part of verifiable LERs because this means that this issuer may issue this credential to the person, and they may go away, and this will still be verifiable for the rest of this person's life, at least at this level. Okay, so how do we get them? Typically, this is the flow, or this is one of the flows. So you have a relationship with an organization, maybe an institution, and you complete a course. And the issuer says, the institution says, hey, I've sent you an email. Here's how you can claim a credential for your course. So then typically the earner will say, oh, thank you. I'm going to click this link in your email and I'm going to download this wallet. Most people don't have wallets right now, so this is the flow as it goes. So they download their wallet, and then they go to the issuer, the link that the issuer provides them with the wallet. And there's normally a QR code or a link there, and they click on that. There's some kind of authentication between the wallet and the issuer. The earner accepts it and stores it in their wallet, and from then on, they control who has access. This is very different than how something like Open Badges has worked before. It's not to say that 3.0 Open Badges can't be on a website somewhere too if the earner decides that they should be, but that's not the intention here, right? The intention here is that the credential doesn't even get published until it gets into the earner's hands. And that's a critical piece. That means that they get to control the privacy and the access. And that is part of, I think, one of the most important parts of the underlying technology of this, is that control and access to your own data. Okay, so now I'm an earner, and I have my credentials in my wallet. And then I find out that I'm going to apply for a job with these credentials. And there's a job application website, and they say, hey, why don't you come here to this portal and you can send us your credentials. And how that often would work is you'd use your phone again. You would go, similar to how it worked with the issuer, you would go open up a link or scan a QR code on the employer's site. That would send a message to the wallet, and it would say, okay, these are the credentials that we require for you to apply for this job. And that credential could be, they could say, maybe we want your degree, or we want competency badges, we want proof of citizenship, right? Any of these things. And then what I would do is I would say, okay, I'm going to go find those things in my wallet, and I'm going to click send, and it's going to send it back to the verifier, where they can do the verification process on that. So minimally, what do they check? Well, minimally, like that's required by the specification, is they do the cryptography check. Right? That the data hasn't changed since it's been signed by the issuer, and also that it was signed by that issuer. And like that's the minimal, like absolute minimal that this technology or these standards allow for. But what most verifiers will probably check is issuer identity. For issuer identity, we have things called trust registries. And this is lists of issuers where somebody has said, I recognize this issuer, and I'm going to put them in this list. Right? At DCC, we have issuer registries. We are a consortium of 12 universities, so they're all on our list. So if a verifier wanted to check that, say, Georgia Tech is actually Georgia Tech who issued the credential, they would check that registry as part of that. And those checks can be built into the software. They may also want to check the learner identity. Some credentials may have biometrics, photo, somebody's name. Like in some way, they may choose to make sure that the person who is presenting them the credential is the person who actually earned that credential. They'll probably check that it hasn't been expired. They may want to check that the issuance date is in the past and not in the future, right? That it's properly put together credential. They may want to check that it hasn't been revoked, and that they may also just want to check to make sure that these are appropriate credentials for what they're looking for. Right, just the content of the credential. How am I doing here? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. It's like very little information, but hopefully enough to get these discussions going, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We are going to break into groups about five or six, so you may want to get together. You're mostly in those size groups, but try to get together, and we're going to give you some handouts. These handouts have a scenario on them. They describe this one person's experience with having credentials and being asked for credentials. And then there are a bunch of questions that you can answer together as part of this discussion. And we're going to do this for about half an hour. Answer them the best that you can. We'll walk around and see if you have questions. I'm happy to dig more into the tech if you really have questions about that. We also have a lot of experts in this room, by the way, who know this, so I may call on them, like Kim right here. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to talk about this. So think about when you try to answer these questions, how it feels comfortable for you, right? How would you talk about this? And then we'll come back and try and see how that works, right? Okay, and lastly, put together a couple of resources here. One is if you'd like these slides for like the notes in those slides, you can scan here to get these slides. If you'd like to try this out, like I mentioned, there's a demo. So you could download the wallet here, and then you could scan this to open up a web page where you could put it in your wallet. Mind you, imagine that number two, that web page is something that you received privately from an issuer. Okay. All right, I'll see you all in a little while. Yeah, one clarification to make sure I was clear on the instructions is you're here to work together in groups on these questions. So don't sit by yourself and answer them. But please do write prolifically on them, because we're really hoping that we can use this to help other people understand this too. And we can talk more about this at the end of the workshop. So be liberal with your writing, and don't have to be neat. You can be messy, do whatever you want, but right away. Thank you. Hello, all. Just checking in. I just want to make sure you all know that those are all digital credentials, right? They've already been issued in this scenario, in case, because it came up a couple of times, and the exchange is all happening online. Okay? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, everyone, just a couple more minutes, then we're gonna all come back together, okay? All right, everybody. That went pretty quick. Like the fastest half hour. Why don't we get started talking together about this scenario and these questions? All right. So let's see. Tell me first, how did this scenario go over with you? What questions came up as you just read the scenario? Well, one of the questions, there's a couple of questions that I heard. One was that, like I had said before, like, are these all digital credentials? So we should have been a little bit more specific. Yes, they're all digital credentials. At some point or another, they had made it into Julia's wallet. So let's get through the questions. You ready? The first one. So how does Julia obtain the versions of these credentials? I just said they're in the wallet. But what are some barriers that she might have faced getting these into her wallet? Did you talk about that at all? Did you talk about sort of the flow of what happens when you want your credentials in a wallet? Come on, somebody tell me. Tell me how you would describe this. All right, Kim, you start for us. Okay, can I give you...
Yes. So we heard what you said about assuming it's a digital credential, but we were saying we weren't assuming that they were already in the wallet. So we were saying this sounds like a lot of work for Julia. What if she graduated a long time ago? How does she go get this? And then we also talked about the idea of, you know, certain things like the background check. That was a whole thing I won't get into right now. But let's see. So we talked about all the different kinds of friction that might be introduced depending on, you know, who's doing what versions of the software, the protocols, all that. I don't know if that was what we were supposed to focus on, but...
Wide open here.
Okay.
So. Anybody else? If you were at a party and someone said, I want to put these credentials in my wallet, how would you describe it? Be brave. It doesn't have to be a party. It could actually be like your workplace, too. Maybe it's the same thing.
Well, not surprisingly, we kind of did our own thing. So we really matched the explanation of the LER to why. Like, why bother? So if we have a scenario where we're trying to explain it, this is so annoying. This, Megan said one of the, I mean, I think at our table we really like this metaphor of thinking of it as a video game, because some of the reasons for using an LER, why you would explain it is going to change people's jobs, and it's going to change revenue. So we looked at it like this is a way for a player to get out of a room that they can't. It's a way for them to level up, to pick things up in the game in a way that the employer and the institution may have no understanding about. Am I kind of... So instead of trying to turn it into letter, payload, envelope, and then take that metaphor and kind of overwork it, we thought about it in terms of trying to explain everybody knows what it's like to be in a video game or play a game, and you actually can't win because there are so many things that are preventing you from even progressing.
That's a great conversation to have. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. Even if you think you didn't answer the question in the way that you think it should be answered or had a different kind of conversation, I'd be happy to hear it. What I love to hear is these types of things so that we can keep progressing these conversations and helping people understand it more. So your questions and your conversations are incredibly useful right now, so thank you. Okay, here's one. So number 2, how can the issuers of the credentials be certain of Julia's identity? And so Julia's saying, hey, you sent me a link. I want this credential now. How do they know that it's Julia's? How would you describe that sort of like transaction between, say, an institution and a learner trying to get their wallet, their credential, their, say, degree from the institution? How would you describe that? Andrew, I'm going to start calling on people, so beware.
So there's kind of 2 parts of trust that we talked about, and one has maybe part A and part B. So first of all, how does the institution who's giving Julia that credential already trust that it's Julia? They probably have some sort of authentication pattern for that. So I know that the QR path, for example, that DCC uses could say, I want to present this credential to you, but baked into that QR code is like you have to authenticate against ASU so that ASU still trusts that you're the version of you that we think you are. And then the other side of it is we want to issue this to this wallet. How do we trust that it's your wallet? How do we trust that you own and manage the identity in that wallet? So if this credential is going to be issued to a digital identity, how do we trust that you own that digital identity? And there's kind of 2 parts to that, right? The wallets usually are able to prove that cryptographically, right? They can go through a DID-auth process where they say, I'll prove that I own this identity because I'll sign it with the private key that the wallet manages. But then Stuart brought up a great point that there's, what's that acronym you use? TOFU? Yeah. Trust on first use only. Like Julia could use the wallet to authenticate that, but then she could actually give that wallet to someone else, give that device to someone else, and there's some anxiety there too. So the other way that there could be additional trust here is that the actual DID managed by that wallet is actually associated with like a state driver's license or something like that. So there's backing to that DID that Julia wouldn't be able to, or Andrew wouldn't be able to hand off to Julia as well.
Yeah, that was great. You bring up 2 really great points with your 2 great answers. One is it's not so mystical to really authenticate with issuers. I mean, you do it all the time. You log into websites all the time. So it really uses the same process you use now. One other way that we do it at DCC sometimes is we just say, give us a token when somebody logs in, or give us a special token that's just associated with that person, and then they can use that to get their credential. But we do something like, I think what TOFU is maybe, which I love, which is we'll make sure that that token, that code expires, right? So that they only can do it for a certain amount of time, maybe like a few minutes or something, or then they have to request another one. Yeah, thank you. All right, great. I'm going to move on. We may not get through all of the questions because it's not that long of a workshop. We'll do our best. Okay. Who can view Julia's credentials in her wallet? It's kind of a trick question. Just Julia, that's right. Good answer. So Julia can choose to share her credentials from her wallet. One way is if somebody's requesting them and she sends them the ones that they're requesting. Another way is a wallet may provide a way for her to do that. So for the DCC wallet, we have you can create a share link, and that share link can be public. You can put it all over the place on the web, but also you can kill that share link so it goes away. So the learner still has ultimate control over who can see that credential. All right. Number 4, how do the credentials reach the employer? We talked about the employer being the verifier. In this scenario, the employer is the verifier and also the relying third party. So let's imagine that the employer is very tech savvy and knows how to do the verification part, and that they also are the ones that want to know if they want to hire Julia. Or I think she's been offered the job, actually. So they're just verifying things now. So how do they reach the employer? How would you describe that process? All right, I'm going to call on somebody. Noah. Noah, I'm going to call on you, please. How would you describe it?
Sorry, I don't know that we got to that part, to be honest. So, but so there's.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think that I guess one way that we were that I took it, Cheryl had brought up at DCC the letter and an envelope analogy, and one of the places my mind went is employers as being kind of mailboxes that are competing for put the envelope in here.
Oh, I like that. Mailboxes. That's a good way to talk about it.
We have a question or a response over here, Carrie.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great analogy, but I work at Northeastern University, and we just published a report on digital credentials and HR systems, and our number one finding was that HR systems are not able to read digital credentials. So my short answer to this question is that they're not really reaching the employer, because our employer systems are still relying on very old-fashioned resume PDF uploading, and then oftentimes if you have an additional credential, it just goes into an attachment, but the data attached to it is not read by anything. So I think it's a kind of a big obstacle, to put it lightly.
Do you have any sort of insights as to why HR software might do this?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest reason they will adopt it is if their customers are demanding it. So we need to educate employers on the benefits of having verifiable digital credentials so that major HR systems like Workday and SAP can start adding that technology. But right now it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario. So.
Yeah, we've heard that before. I'm going to point over to Colin and Naomi over here. We've been thinking about this at Education Design Lab, and maybe you have something you could say about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about the Northeastern report, right, is what one of the challenges that has been identified is consumption of those credentials on the HR tech vendor side, but also just talent marketplace, employers in general. So we are putting together a convening for HR tech vendors at the SHRM annual conference to do an understand design session around those challenges and those barriers so that we can work with them to create solutions to be relevant in the emergent marketplace, but also to make sense of the credentials that are out there right now, because I think that is a huge obstacle, and that is one of them. We were just talking about you as a group too. That is a report we're referencing and sharing with those groups, because I think they want to be able to make sense of this, and they are doing that with systems right now, right? They're taking in resumes, cover letters, all that stuff, parsing it out for skills data and then trying to match it to job descriptions. They're doing the best they can, all in silos. But if we can start to leverage the data in these credentials, then they could automate that process and not have to guess, right? They could have consistency across those systems. So if you want to talk more about the HR tech vendor side, please find me, find Naomi, because this is happening June 10th in Vegas as part of SHRM's annual conference. If you have any contacts too, we would like to connect with them. But thanks for bringing that up. And if you haven't read that report, make sure you get a copy of it and have a look. It's super helpful for understanding the landscape more broadly.
I have one thing. Oh, sure.
So I'll say thank you to Chip in advance, because I had a big duh moment. We're talking now about the employer barriers. How many of your institutions are currently consuming or ingesting these same credentials?
Excellent point.
The higher ed institutions are not taking K-12. We're not taking it from other higher ed institutions. And yet we're shaking our head at the employers. So that consumption and ingestion has to be on the pathway and the ecosystem we're building across organizations.
Thank you, Naomi. That's an excellent point. And hopefully some of these conversations can help you find ways to talk to your institutions about it. Hold that one thought. It's a hot topic. And hold that one thought, too. Andrew was first, then I'll come back to you. One thing, there was a report that was put out last year around this time, was the last mile report that some of this other work is based on. It came out of the DCC that you might also want to look up, that has some pretty good recommendations for working with employers too. And also, I just like to keep in mind that a lot of this tech is new, right? I've been working in digital credentials and education for almost over a long time. Almost more than half of my career. And only just now has there been such an uptake. So we're going to get there, but it is very early.
This is not really a brilliant point. I was just curious because I don't work very much in the wallet or verifier space as much as I do in the kind of data management and enterprise system of record and standard space. But I was curious, I was really fascinated by LearnCard's wallet because they kind of go above and beyond what's necessary for the ideal flow we're talking about, right? The ideal flow is you're compliant with VC API standards, with credential handler API standards. Your wallet can receive a verifiable presentation query and respond to it. And that's all great if employers or if other systems are implementing that verification technology. What was neat about LearnCard to me was that it had utility in the wallet app to say, validate this in front of me. And it had utility in the app to pull up attachments linked to the credential. And I wonder how much there's a thought about if we are anxious about the momentum of verifiers picking up the technology, how much wallet implementers are saying, okay, well, we even talked about a scenario what if Julia was just in the HR office and she's like, I have this credential, you can prove it on the app and you can see the attachments on the app. I wonder how much they're thinking of that as a kind of low-hanging fruit first stage if we're not wanting to wait on the entire ecosystem kind of picking up.
Yes to all of that, definitely. And I think that's already starting to happen, and there's going to be more of that, so yes. Also, Duncan at LearnCard, I hope you hold a session later on LearnCard, because they're doing some really cool social badges that I'm kind of excited about, self-assessments, which we haven't even touched upon yet.
I think for me, I just wanted to hit on Naomi's point there. There was a slide earlier that Kate showed us with 74 million credentials issued, and I don't know the answer to this question, but how many of those have been cashed in some way? We've issued 74 million tokens. How many of those tokens have been exchanged to an employer, to a university, or something else?
How many of which tokens?
How many of those? So we've issued 74 million credentials.
Oh, and the badges in the world?
Badges. How many of those have actually been accepted and used?
5.
We're making progress. We're making progress.
Really, I think that there have been millions and millions of these credentials put out in the world, and nobody's done anything with them. So it's really exciting to talk about verifying and the employer side of things so that we can work on that.
I think to build on that point that Chip is making, so 74 million badges, half of the room can roll their eyes as they hear another one of my metaphors. Like, which of those badges is a CPR certification that you need for a lifeguard incident and a lifeguarded job? And how many of those badges are, hey, we gave you a badge for showing up to this event today and absolutely no assessment affiliated with it? So there's just this really exciting, I think, jumble and chaos in what the signals are that badges can make. One of the things that we've been thinking about with the TLN and really trying to leverage is that we have strong trust signals around degrees. We have relatively strong trust signals around things like courses because those have been around for 100 years. And a whole ecosystem is built around them to give them credibility. But one of the things we think about in our governance conversations a lot is how do we start, what could we do to build credibility into that space as well and inject a sense of value, inject a sense of trust that is sort of missing right now. So I think that trust is really sticky too, and difficult perhaps to portray in something like a verifiable credential, right? But that's a huge opportunity for us all.
Yeah, definitely, Kate. I'm sorry, I was being like a little bit flippant there, but many years ago, I'm sorry. Okay. Many years ago, I had written this piece on how open badges could be more verifiable if they weren't open badges, right? If they weren't hosted on websites, because who's going to trust something that's hosted on a web server? So we started working on the verifiability of it, and this is better, right? And this is almost as good as you walking into the office and showing them that's watermarked and all of that. But also embedded in all of this is something we're not going to really talk about today at all, is like what is the actual content in the credential and what makes that trustworthy. That's not my expertise. I'm trying to help us like talk about the tech today, but that's a big conversation that many people are having. Right? There's a lot about trust embedded there too. And we have about we don't have too much time left, so instead of going through the rest of the questions, why don't I just sort of open it up and see like what questions you have or something you want to talk about. Kim.
Yeah, this is sort of a tangent on the previous question. Okay, so part of the design of decentralized identity architectures in some implementations prevent you from getting those metrics, you as the issuer, right? So a lot of times they try to design it so they call it like you can't phone home to the issuer, and that has certain characteristics like privacy and avoiding the ability to track. Now, it varies widely based on the implementation. So, but one thing that's been a source of friction in terms of adoption, right? Like a lot of issuers are really gung-ho decentralized identity approaches until they learn they can't do the analytics they expect to do. So would you still be interested in these solutions if it prevented your ability to know where they use their credentials? So it's sort of who's doing the tracking, who is figuring out that where it's used.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, of the badging platforms that exist now, that's a huge value proposition for them. That's how they get issuers to join their platforms, because they can give that feedback to them. But that's going to change in this new model. So what is the business model of doing all of this?
So the question that's going through my mind is about money. Currently, the way we verify credentials is to get an official transcript from an institution, which a student pays for. At mine, it's $5 because we're a community college. I was looking up, because I used to work at ASU, it's $15 here. I know there's places that charge a lot more. And so if we want to verify our degree, we have to pretty much get an official transcript. And that's why most employers don't look at that, I think, to a small degree. They just take your word for it on the resume because there's no cost involved there. As I think about the equity side and think about a number of our community college students, that $5 could be the difference between applying for a job or not. We see that already where community college students drop out because they have to go get a $10 shot for their immunizations, and they go, I don't have that right now, and they walk away and never complete any classes, much less the registration process. So we know that used to be a manual process, so we paid people to do that job, and then we made it electronic. And so we kept the fee in place because we didn't give up the money, and now that pays for the system that runs it. If we're going to have a verifiable system that now bypasses all of that, if that gets checked, and I was thinking about the scenario here with a nurse, if that gets verified annually, who pays for that annually? And that's, or does this, are we breaking out of an ecosystem and telling our colleges and universities that's one revenue stream that needs to go away and you don't have anymore? So I think there's some cost to think about from that point of view.
Absolutely. I don't have your answer for that, but I'll tell you, no, nobody really does, but I'll tell you two things I've heard recently. One is, if you're paying for tuition, why do you have to pay for your transcript, right? I mean, come on, you already paid enough, right? So why can't like $1 be tacked on to everybody's tuition, and then they can just get their transcript? I mean, I don't know. That's one thought. That's my own thought, but you know, I've heard it from other people too. There are people who are looking at this from a micropayments perspective, right? Where verifiers pay a very, very small amount, and that money, actually, most of it makes it back to the issuer in a way where there's still no phone home. So it's being thought of, but it could be something like that so that revenue stream somehow continues. So there's some thinking going on about it for sure. Okay. Gillian, how are we doing on time? 5 minutes? Oh my goodness, how'd that happen? Okay, I'm gonna close this down a little bit here. Okay, here's Ziggy again. We've created a feedback form. We would really appreciate it if you would give us feedback. All of it is optional, but you know, answer the questions as best as you can. Ideally, so you've all had these forms. We would love it if we could either take a photo of your form, or if you would give it to us, and if you put your email address, we'll get you a photo of it. We'd really like to collect this so that we could write some things about, you know, what you've all discussed. You don't have to hand it over to us. You don't have to put your name on it if you don't want to. But if you could, it'd be extremely helpful for us to like do this again and improve upon what we're doing. I think that's it. I guess lastly, on this document, and not in the slides, but the Digital Credential Consortium is expanding membership. So if you are interested in that, you should reach out to me. You talk to me today, and I can get you more information about that. You know, my goal is to help us build out software that you can run on your systems super fast and easy as soon as possible. So that's the goal we're doing there. That's the thing we're working towards there. Gillian, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Unless you've got more,
I think there was like something else that I was going to say. Yes.
Do you have to be officially a member of DCC to actually like use the digital wallet that you've created?
No, not at all. I think like most of the services you get if you're a member is that it's more like consulting services, and we go in there and really help you out. But we're around anyway, and we're working out in the community. All the software is open source. It's free. So not at all. I think so. I feel like there was one more thing, but I can't remember what it was. So I guess most of all, thank you. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned some new things today. I learned from you for sure, and I'll see you this afternoon at the Unconference.